everyone to the Penny Stamps Distinguished Speaker Series. Hello and welcome to the Penny Stamps Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Christina Hamilton, the series director. Today, we delve into the changing face of journalism in a conversation which brings together Rainey Aronson-Rath and Lynette Clemetson to contemplate what is journalistic truth, who is telling our stories, and how are we consuming them? How do we understand the world around us and the issues that we are facing as a society? Before we join our guests, a little background on each. Rainey Aronson-Rath is the executive producer of Frontline, PBS's flagship investigative journalism series, and a leading voice on the future of journalism. Aronson-Rath oversees Frontline's acclaimed reporting on air and online and directs the series' editorial vision, executive producing over 20 documentaries each year on critical issues facing the country and the world. At a time when broad skepticism of the news media has reached new highs, Aronson-Rath has cemented Frontline's reputation as a source of trustworthy and consistent investigative journalism. She has expanded Frontline's reporting capacity, spearheaded an initiative to bolster local journalism in news deserts, and led an ongoing charge for transparency in journalism. Lynette Clemetson is the director of Wallace House, Knight Wallace Fellowships, and the Livingston Awards for Young Journalists at the University of Michigan. A longtime journalist, she was a correspondent for Newsweek magazine in the US and Asia, a national correspondent for the New York Times, and senior director of strategy and new initiatives at NPR. Now, I will turn it over to Lynette Clemetson to lead us forth.
Rainey Aronson, thank you so much for joining us. It's such a pleasure to be here to talk with you about the amazing work of Frontline. We should start by saying that Frontline has won every major journalism and broadcast award in its history, 95 Emmy Awards, 24 Peabody Awards. But since you took over as executive producer in 2015, of that total, 20 of those Emmys and 9 of those Peabodys have happened during your tenure. And so it's such a pleasure to come here and talk to you today about your vision and work with Frontline. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here with you, Lynette. Anytime I can spend an hour with you is treasured. Thank you so much for having me.
For people who aren't familiar with Frontline, I would like to start by just giving a little bit of taste of the program and what you all do. So if we can just start by watching a clip and then we'll have a conversation.
Thanks.
America has decided to go another way.
The new president-elect Joe Biden faces what may be the biggest...
Amy Coney Barrett confirmed in record time.
President Trump tested positive for COVID-19.
Death toll climbing about 200,000 Americans.
Calls for justice continue to fill the streets.
Today, the dire situation in Italy got even worse.
The first death this weekend in Washington state. President Trump, the third president to be impeached.
We built the greatest economy anywhere in the world.
Patient number 1 arrived here in this.
He did.
Facts and science, that's the only thing that's going to get us through this.
We're seeing hallways with patients and doctors that are completely overwhelmed.
And it takes 18 days to get to the president.
Correct.
Every lab is fighting for itself. Every state is fighting for itself.
There's a failure in the system. It creates sheer and utter chaos.
She's 30 years old. She just had a baby. She's really sick.
31 employees of a local farm company have been infected by...
It doesn't feel like we're essential. It feels like we're slaves.
How big is this problem?
The country's on fire and their anger is directed at law enforcement officers.
Can this be done in a way that still respects people's rights?
There's way more kids like this is going through the same thing as we are, because sometimes life just happens and things go the wrong way.
Black and brown people who are disproportionately impacted by the virus, well, that's the same group of people that can make and break an election.
people were angry.
Outrage machine.
Are they going to start storming the gate?
Today, there's just a lack of respect.
Government orchestrated inside job. Powerful world government.
Conspiratorial thinking is a feature of this president.
Mitch McConnell had the votes from start to finish. He knew it, and he behaved that way all along.
This is a conflict that's less about policy or direction for the country, but it's really a vision of what the country ought to be.
The division that has been created here recently is going to take generations to recover.
Now, what's the next step? You know, it's not over. This is just the beginning.
I love those words at the end there, fair, trusted, transparent. And it really gets to what I appreciate so much about Frontline. In this time when we get so much of our news from social media, from very short threads, and from 24-hour news, I know that when I turn on Frontline, I am going to get an hour to focus on a topic in a thoughtful way and to really get a chance to put pieces of puzzles together and really see how the news is informed by events coming from various directions. And I really like the in-depth approach of the investigative films that you make. Can you start just by talking to us about what the mission is of Frontline and what you are compelled to do through your leadership?
Well, I love that you've reflected on our forum, because for Frontline, it actually starts with how we tell our journalism. And one thing that we are committed to today, as much as we were literally 38 years ago, is taking the time to report, to do proper and fair journalism, and then to tell a story that will capture you. So narrative storytelling is very important to us, but is also fair and vetted. And that takes time. And when I took over, as you mentioned, a number of years ago, you know, I did have the choice to think about what we should do. And one thing I recommitted to again and again, despite the disruption that was happening around us, was actually what we could do that was special is long form journalism in documentary form. And it occurred to me that the streaming environment that we're publishing into, in addition to our broadcast, is actually made for the long form documentary. It's actually not necessary to be quick twitch, and it's not necessary to do clickbait type journalism. It's actually more important to be in these environments with serious work. And you know, the audience has reacted in droves. We have millions of new viewers. And I think the reason for that, people who watch us, not just for 2 minutes, but on average, sometimes on our YouTube channel, people will watch us for 20, 30 minutes. And the reason for that is because we're giving them something that feels real, that feels authentic, and doesn't feel like our thumb is on the scale. And that's something that I really, really believe the tradition of Frontline has helped me contemporize, certainly, but also bring that tradition into what we're all living right now, which is an incredibly complicated media landscape.
And I think in this moment when we have had just such a difficult past year of news, whether it's the pandemic and complicated stories about healthcare and disparities in the country, or divisions in the country surrounding the election and increasing polarization and misinformation. You've tackled the platforms, you've tackled COVID, you've tackled politics. And I think it's, you know, we have to mention that just as we're coming to this conversation today, as we move into this period where we think we might be seeing some light at the end of the tunnel with COVID, that we're sitting down to talk after a difficult period of a couple of mass shootings. And we're trying to grapple with hatred and violence against Asian Americans. And so having you be able to give us a time each week when we can slow down and really focus on these things is important. But I imagine when this news breaks, trying to make decisions about how quickly you respond and what you do when we're confronted with hate in the country and needing to slow people down, that's got to be a difficult editorial decision.
It is. And I'll tell you, with COVID in particular, starting a year ago, we did move faster than we do, typically speaking. We actually decided to put a documentary on the air in 5 weeks because we thought it was so urgent that people understood the health risks that, of course, the former president was not articulating. So what we were seeing on the ground in Washington, the way the Washington state politicians and leaders were acting towards COVID was very different than the national response. And so we were seeing that in our reporting, and we felt that that was not something we should hold back. And we published within 5 weeks our first film on COVID. I would say that as incidents have gone on, we've responded in the most authentic way that we feel is additive to the conversation. And let me explain what I mean. What I mean is Frontline doesn't always have to be there with information unless it is valid, unless it is adding something. And so what happened this summer, for example, with George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, we had been doing very deep and very important investigative reporting on police abuse with Jelani Cobb and an incredible team of filmmakers. And so we decided to pivot very quickly to look at what has happened since the last time we had been reporting, what's happened in the Trump era, what has happened to the accountability of police departments across America. And so we worked together with Jelani and others to say, what can we add? And what we could add to that conversation was what has happened in the Department of Justice regarding consent decrees, actually looking at the structures of accountability and how they have broken down in the last number of years and highlighting that work. The Asian American attack this last week was really one of the most traumatic incidents. And what we decided to do as an institution is to actually come out and have an anti-racist moment as an institution, as a GBHers, and of course, Frontline is part of GBH, and to say racism in any form is not okay.
WGBH in Boston, for those who are listening to us in other
markets. I should say that. Yeah, GBH, like Detroit, the local stations across the country have been responding. We felt it was important to come out with a collective statement, and we are now doing additional reporting. But I will say, Frontline's reporting on the rise of hate and extremism, both domestically and abroad, has been actually the focus of my tenure editorially. When I talk about documenting hate in that work, when we have highlighted since COVID started to take hold, the former president's hate speech around China, that hate speech, that racism that comes out from a national platform has the effect of normalizing racism. The work that we've done through the Trump administration's era also included a film that we aired in the fall of this year called American Voices, which featured an Asian American family who also owned a nail salon who had been attacked in the fall. So these are stories that we're telling as journalists. And I think the frustration for all of us in journalism right now is how can we do more? And how can our work be impactful? How can we turn this tide of hate? How can we be part of that change making in impact of how journalism can turn a light in places that really matter? And for us, that's the accountability journalism space that we take a lot of attention to when it comes to hate speech and racism.
Well, you mentioned the work that you did with Jelani Cobb looking at Newark. But when I think back about Frontline Films, I started paying attention to this thread in your editorial work after Charlottesville. And so for people who arrive in a difficult moment like the one we're in now, we can look back and you can follow a narrative, right, through Frontline work that lines us up to this period today. And you're continuing this work, right, after the incidents of January 6th and the insurrection at the Capitol, looking at what are these movements that we have coalescing in the United States and how they're intersecting with ongoing problems like the problem with gun violence and mass shootings, and how when those things line up with white supremacy and the rise of militias and hate groups, what we are combating here in the United States. I would like to take a look at a clip from a film that you have called American Insurrection that points to just a bit of these forces coming together.
I think about a revolution against the government. We're past the point of peace.
From Charlottesville to the assault on the Capitol.
One of the darkest days in the history of our nation.
We're seeing this country fall apart before our eyes.
How the former president galvanized an army.
Who's our president? Trump's our president!
You've got a guy who's a nationalist in the most powerful seat in the world. We can actually win. We can actually get our views represented.
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
So Trump encouraging calls to lock Whitmer up.
Lock them all up.
The far-right militias have felt much more licensed to publicly engage.
Terror plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer.
And so you think the guys were planning to arrest her?
It was going to be a citizen's arrest.
2 militia groups who were preparing to kidnap and possibly kill me.
You don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Violent mobs, stoked by the words of President Trump, stormed the building.
They were hostile. They were venomous that their country somehow was being taken away from them.
In the aftermath of the 2020 election, how these groups have become part of the American political landscape.
What was the role of the Boog Boys on that day?
There was some Boogaloo Boys in the crowd associated with us. They weren't there for Trump. They were there just to mess with the federal government one more time.
Over the last several years, Frontline and ProPublica have been reporting on the rise of hate
About
groups
what you did in Charlottesville last year.
and their violence.
What do you think was going on in this house?
They were making bombs.
Now, correspondent A.C. Thompson investigates the surge of far-right political violence.
What do soldiers and Marines bring to the Boogaloo?
They bring training expertise in certain areas.
They have decided this is a strategic initiative for them. There's a real, legitimate fear. We've got to be vigilant about it.
I'm afraid that more innocent civilians are going to be targeted and actually victimized by these violent offenders. Everything that we had predicted has come to fruition, and it's actually worse.
The first in a series of films on the rise of extremism around the world.
We definitely are the modern militia. We're the ones crazy enough to actually do something.
That film is American Insurrection, premiering April 13th on broadcast, on your broadcast PBS channel, and also streaming. And when we talk about streaming, I do want to talk a little bit about your audience, because I think that there has been, as journalism has really gone through many changes in the past several years, there's been, with the rise of social media, this thought that people's attention spans are short and that news needs to be kind of quick and highly emotional. And Frontline takes an approach through investigative documentary films of really slowing things down. Can you talk to us a little bit about your audience and who's watching Frontline? Because I suspect that your growing audience doesn't necessarily track with some people's notions about how people like to consume news.
Right. I think it's been very counterintuitive. And I have to say, it's a joy. So starting a number of years ago, we started to see our streaming numbers. So people just watching digitally, because we stream all of our films for free. We're in front of a paywall. One of the most extraordinary assets, I believe, is that we are available to anyone who wants to watch us. You don't have to have a subscription to Netflix or Amazon. You really can watch us. And so we started to see a surge in people watching us online who would find us. And then we started publishing last year on YouTube our full-length films. And what we saw there was an incredible quadrupling of our streaming numbers on YouTube. And what we see at YouTube is remarkable. We all thought, to be quite honest, they would probably watch for 2 or 3 minutes. I have a 14-year-old, so I was really curious what the younger generation was going to do with their watching habits. It turns out Frontline's audience is about 18 to 35 is the majority that's on YouTube. And they watch us on average, as I said earlier, for a half an hour. And they watch our full-length films. They're not interested in our promos. they're not interested in any of our promotional materials. What they want to see are the real films. And I have a couple of theories about this. You know, frontline films, especially reporter-led, first-person told films, do really well. Social justice issues do really well. So sometimes we will see a difference in our audience on broadcast, for example, and we'll say, okay, so that audience on broadcast appreciated that film, but didn't appreciate this film as much. But on YouTube, we're seeing the opposite. Issues about growing up poor in America that we have been so pleased to see massive millions of people watching. Issues around social justice and racism, those issues resonate with younger generations. They're watching us, they're commenting, they're engaging with each other. And it's a new environment for us. And it says that public media resonates, right? And so as you watch on YouTube, you're also related to your station. And we have a donate area. And there's a whole ecosystem now that includes younger people who come to us on different platforms. And my theory and Frontline's theory has always been, go to where the people are watching. Take your work to them. Do not assume people are going to come to you. Never have that assumption. Do not lay back ever. And certainly, again, because I do have teenage children, I was able to see their watching habits dramatically shift. And I have been cognizant of this for years now. And it's a remarkable thing that in this past year, we have quadrupled the numbers of people watching us online.
It's incredible.
Really incredible for us.
It's incredible. And it's really been a mark of your tenure. And I think, you know, as one of the things that people are trying to figure out, whether that's local, regional, national, or international news, how you move to new platforms without sacrificing your editorial core. And I think you have really demonstrated how to experiment in different spaces, but
Yes.
really keep that investigative core of Frontline solid. And that maintaining that integrity, you are developing new audiences. And I think it's a really bright light for public media. And for me, you know, I have worked in public media as well. And it's just a joy to see new audiences, new voices, and diverse audiences finding their way to public media content, whether it's audio or video.
Right. I mean, that's been such a joy for us too. Like we look at the diversity of our audience. Actually, Frontline has, for example, as a primetime show, the largest Black audience watching our documentaries. And it's really gratifying to see that. Our data is only a couple of years old, so we don't know if we've always been that way, right? But finally, we're starting to see how we can also move our audiences to be increasingly diverse. So we're not stopping at that. Where are the communities that we're not reaching? Do we need to take a look at English language only? And so we're starting to translate, for example, some of our documentaries into Spanish, not just issues that relate to Latinx communities, but also just issues in general. And this is something I really want to move into in the next year is how do we identify the communities that we're not reaching? And that's really always my mindset. It's not, oh, great, we have that audience. It's how can I reach the people that we're not reaching? And that's literally the mindset of everyone at Frontline. That includes, by the way, who we're putting on camera, who's directing. You know, it's never enough what we've done so far. You know, progress is always 1 foot forward, half a foot back, going ahead, trying to figure out where we're not quite there yet, trying to figure out, you know, how we could always do better. And that's an ethos that I always have, but also everyone around me.
Yes. And you know, when we think about audiences, a lot of people focus on how they're going to reach their audience. But in a news organization, it also comes down to who you're working with within
100%.
your news organization. Yes. Who's on staff? How much does your staff, the people you work with, the people who make your films, look like the audiences that you're trying to reach, and actually share some experiences, lived experiences that intersect with the kind of storytelling you're trying to do. And I know at Frontline, you've also tried to really think about who makes Frontline. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you've thought about expanding the reach of filmmakers you're working with and the layers and layers of staff that you have in building your whole enterprise?
I mean, it actually was my number one priority when I took over. And I've told you privately, and I feel fine saying this, that I felt like if I couldn't ethically lead Frontline, then I wasn't the right person. It was that clear to me that I needed to really focus on not just diversifying our directors and also women producers and directors, but really focusing on, again, the mindset of who are we not hearing from in the producing pool? Who are we not hiring? So one of the very, very first things I did, and on our staff, mind you, right, which we've had a really big shift towards diversity. I would say that the most important thing I did was some structural work. The first thing we did is understand, who are we? We surveyed ourselves. It had to be voluntary, of course, right? But we wanted to understand, who are we and who are our producers? And we were, myself, not that surprised at the beginning. But as we've surveyed and as we've actually worked on this DEI work very seriously through and through our organization, we've seen progress. Just on Monday, we were able to look at the data that is 10 years now of data, which we've been not just looking at who's the producer, but also who shows up on the screen, who are our experts, who do we go to tell us authoritatively what's going on in the world. And we've seen a shift towards the positive. But again, I will tell you, and I mean this, we are just beginning. I like the end of the original clip that was, about Frontline. And, that wonderful character in a film says, this is just the beginning. That's how I feel. This is just the beginning, as much progress as we have made. We have a long road to travel, and I acknowledge that. And I have to say, one of the biggest graces in my work is that I have a senior team of amazing, remarkable people. And I just need to say their names because they're so important to me and my work. Sarah Childress, Erica Howard, Carla Barras, and Andrew Metz. And there's many other people too who work with us, but that core team are the people who are helping us move forward. And the work we've done from really turning over and enlarging the tent of frontline producers and directors also includes data collection and being honest with ourselves of, who do we trust to come and tell us what's quote unquote real, and how do we shift that? How do we create a database of filmmakers of color? And actually, there's a lot of them out there, but specific to investigative journalism, how can we become a resource that we're doing this work, not just to keep it inside the Frontline family, but how do we then say, okay, public media, here's what we've learned. Here are the experts we've found who are remarkable. It wasn't hard, by the way, at all.
Can we talk about this a little bit? Yeah. Because you and I have had conversations before about news organizations trying to really lean into diversity. And you'll hear often that, well, the pipeline, we just don't, it's hard to find people. And our experience is that it is not actually hard to find people. And so I want to hear a little bit about how you deal with that with your peers in the industry who are in leadership positions, who are trying to make strides, but really are not starting from a place where diversity is natural or easy to reach.
Yeah, I mean, I think the very first thing about that, this is too hard, is I will say, no, it's harder to stay non-diverse. The harder road forward and the less ethical road forward is the way that they think is less hard. And that's just not true. That is a rubric and a white-based rubric, which is not true. And so the very first thing is I actually ban the "this is too hard" conversation. And I have said, gently but firmly, and I believe this is my role to say this now with proof, that if you say it's too hard to me, then we'll just wait a little while, go do some work and come back to me when you're ready to just not ever say that to me again, because I'm at a point now where it's just not true. It never was true. What I will say about investigative journalism, which has been elite and white male for literally ever, is that what we do need to do is create intentional pathways. Intention is everything, right? So when I talk about intention, I mean not just expecting that people have had the training that someone who is white has had, right? And so you're also responsible for that as a leader. So some of the ways that we've worked on is identifying, for example, in our Firelight Media Fellowship, where is that structural challenge? One of the challenges is the investigative journalism challenge. There's been more access points for filmmaking, but for investigative journalism, how do we come into that breach intentionally and create production dollars and funding and support? It's not just about money, right? It's also about support. And so many of the Firelight Media people, we're a few years into that fellowship, have said to me, the work is actually supportive that Frontline does. It's not inhibitive. It's not so elite you can't get in. It's actually start to talk about the support that we can give as a news organization to people who might be new to investigative journalism, and then pay them for it. So a lot of this is about how do you create intentional avenues for success, then support that success, not just like, hey, here's a fellowship, good luck, but then support that pathway forward.
I think it's so, so important. And, I've heard people say sometimes as a way of praising the work you're doing, people will say, oh, it's not your grandfather's Frontline. And I'm thinking, who was your grandfather? It sort of makes assumptions about
journalism, right?
About journalism, about investigative journalism, about who is able to approach investigative journalism. And even in that, I think it's implied about who is assumed to be neutral or objective or authoritative. Right. And it's just time that we bust all of that up.
They're just false assumptions. And I think that is, it's actually rooted in our work now. You can see it for years and years and years now. We have proved over and over and over again. Someone like Daffodil Altan, who takes us inside the world of people who are undocumented living through COVID, and she takes us in there and then does accountability journalism, is authoritative. She has access to a community that we can understand is suffering, and it's unfair, it's unequal what they're going through. Yet they're the people who are creating a way for us to eat our vegetables, right? So that we are all interconnected, right? This inequality that there's a perception that we're not involved with is not true either. So I think we are showing time and time again that it's just not true. I mean, honestly, one of the big breakthroughs for Frontline is just actually increasing the tent. So many people now produce for Frontline. I had a really emotional moment. You mentioned the awards, and I never thought about sort of the prior awards versus recent awards under my tenure, but there was a moment at the DuPont Awards when we were all standing together. I decided to bring up everyone from Frontline. And, I looked around and I said, this is how Frontline should feel and look and be. We should be and look like America. And there we were together. And then the next thought is, what more can we do? It's never like, that's so great. It's just like, okay, where are we not meeting those needs? It's a mindset actually for everything that we do that I think is now the culture of Frontline, and everyone's involved in this work, which is really exciting.
I think it's really important. You can't underscore this enough, right? How much you have to see your work as ongoing and change is ongoing.
Absolutely.
And I think it's easy sometimes to focus on technology and how technology is always changing, but the work of equity is also always changing, and it's something you have to be constantly involved in. And so bravo to you for continuing to build your staff and continuing to really ask those questions. Who's not represented here, and how do we add those voices? I do want to talk about women and Frontline, because it's not just your leadership, but I really have seen an exciting surge in women being the filmmakers, the directors, the producers Absolutely. Of the films that you're putting out. And that is a big change, I think, in investigative journalism and filmmaking. Just a couple of weeks ago, I joined a conversation with you around the film 1,000 Cuts.
Yes.
About
Ramona Diaz.
Journalist Maria Ressa's struggle in the Philippines against the Duterte government, and the amazing filmmaker Ramona Diaz there. And so you're really elevating a new generation of women filmmakers. How How has that developed, and how have you started to find people to highlight? Are they just coming to you, or are you?
Well, now they're coming to me. It's kind of amazing. One of the things I did start out really going to conferences myself and saying, actually, I had to go to them to say, we're now here, and it's a safe place to come to Frontline. I think, there was always an idea that we were so elite, the boundaries are there so that so many people would never even write us or be in touch, even if they had an extraordinary film. So I really worked hard at being accessible and being in the world. And you saw that during those couple of years. I was literally on the road all the time, basically holding the shingle up like Frontline's here. So one of the things about women filmmakers is I am one. So I am a woman filmmaker, right? And so those stories that I told were really deeply important to me too, inside the abortion wars, from a female perspective, being able to be in an abortion clinic as a woman, being able to sit with women before and after their abortion as a woman. Those experiences really led me to understand not just about a woman, but also about BIPOC filmmakers. There is a time and a place for us to be in a space where we can get the best story. It's actually better journalism too, right? And so it was not necessarily conscious, but I knew that there needed to be more filmmakers who are of color and also who are women. And those two things kind of came hand in hand. And so I think about Ramona Diaz and Daffodil, of course, and of course, Waad Al-Khatib, who we'll talk about. So many women now producing for Frontline, Ramita Navai, and I could just go on. And it is so gratifying for me to be able to work with them and help them, and vice versa. Some of the conversations are as additive for me as I am to them. And I learn every single day from all of them, how to be a better leader. The conversations are sophisticated and open and difficult at times too. And those are the conversations that I face head on, as best as I can.
In the names that you just mentioned, there are several that really represent Frontline's reach into international news. And we've been talking in the first part of this conversation about domestic journalism focused on the United States and some of the struggles we focus here. But in Frontline's history, international news has been so important. And it continues to be. And when I think just about your work in Syria, you've done what, 15 films?
Yeah, 17 in total. It's actually been another big hallmark of our work. And in my tenure, because it really started right before I took over, is to tell stories from Syria. I think, what we started to see unfold there, and certainly Frontline has historically done a ton of work in the Middle East, right? So we're building on that work and that expertise. One of the things that we noticed right away is the Syrian story needed to be told in documentary form. We needed to document what was happening. And we had teams there documenting throughout the whole Syrian conflict. And we continue to today. In fact, we have a film coming out in May that's about Syria. So one person in particular, however, and we'll talk about her, is Waad Al-Khatib. And she is an extraordinary storyteller in her own right, but she started to collect video when she was living in Aleppo with her husband, who's a doctor, and they were living in a hospital, and she has a baby. And she actually documents the whole Syrian conflict through the eyes of being a young protester herself, falling in love, having a baby, and what it was like to actually be on the front lines in a hospital setting, being bombed, of course, as we all now know. Most of those bombings were happening, aided and abetted by Russia, if not directly from Russia. And a lot of the work that she showed had current affairs import too. And so together, Waad and Ed Watts, who's a great director as well, worked on creating a long-form feature-length film called For Sama. And she told the Syrian conflict from a different perspective, and probably one of the most gratifying films that I've ever been associated with and worked on is For Sama.
It's an incredible film. And we have a clip of it for people who haven't had a chance to see it. And it's an illustration of everything we've been talking about up to now, right? The editorial focus and integrity, the power of long form journalism,
Right.
and what happens when you shift the voice of the storyteller and really center that voice
Right.
and bring that lived experience into a film. I get chills every time I watch this film, and I've seen it a couple of times, and it's been recognized, right? For Sama received an Oscar nomination,
Right.
and so your move to actually validate different kinds of storytelling has really been validated in the industry. If we can just take a look at a clip from For Sama.
بحلب مدينتي. لسه عم صور. هذا الشيء اللي عم بيخلي معنى لوجودي. ما حدا منا كان عنده أي فكرة كيف رح تتغير حياتنا للأبد. حمزة أنا حامل.
سما سما
سما عملت هالفيلم مشانك. بدي إياك تفهمي شو اللي كنا عم نقاتل مشانه.
بحبك كثير أكثر من
أشو بيضرب كثير اليوم؟ سما أنا بعرف إنك عم تفهمي شو عم بيصير. بقدر أشوف هالشي بعيونك. ما عم تبكي مثل أي طفل عادي. هذا الشيء اللي عم يحرق لي قلبي. سما رح تسامحيني؟
Wow.
Oh God, Wad. You know, I know Wad personally, and the ways that she was able to connect to all of us throughout this whole process has been extraordinary. You know, I like to tell people this who are not in the tradition of filmmaking that, you know, a film becomes a film in the edit. In other words, when it's being put together. And Wad had 2 or 3 other ways of telling this story. And then finally, she and Ed came up with this remarkable idea of a letter to her daughter. But it wasn't until the 3rd or 4th iteration, and the idea was so brilliant, it was theirs, it was perfect, that we added on, you know, I think another 6 months of editing, because it was such a special way to tell this story. And I think that's what we focus on a lot at Frontline is what is the best way to tell the story that we're telling? Who should be telling it? But also, how do we want to tell it? How are we going to be able to reach across our divides and to talk to each other and to make sure that when you're watching something like that, it doesn't matter if you're Syrian or not. You relate to that moment, right? As a person, and the humanity in those scenes and in her experiences, you know, really moved audiences. We saw this in the theaters and in festivals where if Wad was there, people would want to hug her. And, you know, we had to be very like, hey, you can't just like come in and hug Wad. You know, like we were almost like bodyguards. Like you can't do that, you know, with all due respect. I know you want to hug her, but the emotion that she was able to elicit with her story was profound.
Well, and I think, you know, your approach to allowing filmmakers to experiment, right, with in the edit, what is the best way? What's going to be, okay, let's start with a pressing news issue. Now, how do we take that and craft it in a way that's going to reach people. You can really see that special touch in the work of Frontline. And you said a few moments ago, you said, I am a filmmaker, right? I am a woman filmmaker. And I think that has a lot to do with it. And so I'd love to just step back a bit and have you talk to us about your path in journalism and to leadership, because I think sometimes we have these conversations with leaders and it's as if they always were executive of something, right? And of course that is not true, and everybody has a path. And I think yours has been a particularly interesting one. So can you talk to us about how you became a journalist and what your path was to Frontline?
Sure. I mean, we've talked about this too. It's now harder because it's so long, right? So I'll do the very short version. But before I do that, I want to say something about Frontline and the forms of stories we're telling. And this is the heart of what I believe in. It doesn't matter the way you're telling the story, but the process, the journalistic process and the vetting and fact checking that is in the background of all of this is the same. Doesn't matter if you're putting a podcast on Frontline, doesn't matter if it's a major Oscar nominated film. So let me give you a direct example. Like when you see For Sama, and we actually identify the bombings that happen in those hospitals as Russian led, that's because we vetted that. That's because we know that, right? The facts are there. And one of the strongest assets that we have is our journalistic experience, but the team of fact checkers from Laura Nizell, who is more than a fact checker, but one of our senior editors. But she really puts a lens on, are we being fair? Are we being tough? Is this correct? She is incredible. And so her laser focus on this is something that I really can't speak. That process I noticed was completely different as a filmmaker when I joined Frontline 20 years ago as a filmmaker, was that level of scrutiny, that level of conversation is what makes Frontline have integrity, right? Okay, so back to who I am. So know this.
Back to your integrity and how you develop. Yes.
So I grew up in a very unusual way. I grew up in an off-the-grid situation in a rural town in Vermont, and my parents moved there. And I grew up in a very small town. And my classes actually had about 20 people per class. So very small public school environment. And I grew up without a television. A really big differentiator for me and most of my generation is like, I don't know the 80s on TV. It's one of the funniest things with my husband, Arun, where he's like knows so much about pop culture and I just don't. But we did have a newspaper, and the newspaper came religiously every single day. And it literally became my lifeline. And I knew right away as a young person, we're starting at 10, 11, 12, I needed to be in the world. And it's just as simple as that. I needed to just go into the world. So I went to the University of Wisconsin at Madison, had a great newspaper, joined the newspaper as a college reporter. I highly recommend it to all young people who ask me, like, what do I do? How do I know if I like journalism? And I just say, start doing journalism. And I loved being a college reporter. And I remember, holding the dean to account for some, missteps that she had made and being already in the business of accountability journalism. In fact, Anthony Shadid was my editor. And so there were some profound people who went on to be, really big editors and journalists in their own right, who we were in college together. I also lived in India as a college student, which was unusual. And so I lived in India as a junior year student. And it was the start of my international work. And then I went to Taiwan right after college, which I know we share, Lynette. Mm-hmm. And I became a reporter for the China Post in Taiwan. And one thing I'll note, because you remember the time, because we were in Taiwan at the same time, is it was the first time there were democratic elections. And so as a young reporter, it makes me cry. I got to see people vote for the first time, and I got to document their thoughts, their feelings. And I watched that happen, both as a reporter and a person, a democracy unfold in front of us with all its imperfections. And I knew that, journalism was going to be my calling, literally my calling. And I don't know, like, Lynette, if you want to just say a couple of words about being in Taiwan at that time, the unfolding in Taiwan.
Well, I mean, it was an incredible time to be there in the early 90s. And as you say, I think it as people who are interested in journalism, to be in a society where people are literally figuring out what
Yes.
democratic process is, you get to understand what it means to build a democracy, to build functioning systems, and to not take it for granted. And I think that's something, clearly when I watch your work, I
Right.
see how important and how formative those years were for you.
Yeah, I mean, it gave me the bug for sure, but it also gave me a lens of not forgetting about the world when I came home. And I think a lot of leaders in America who are journalists, if they haven't spent time being a journalist overseas, or they're not related to the rest of the world, they're not understanding. Taiwan is not American centric. It never was, right? It, of course, has a relationship, but Taiwan is itself a place that, look at how they've handled COVID. And by the way, I was not surprised at all when I saw the response and how serious they were and how organized they were. And I started to see that as a young person. But I went to Columbia Journalism School. I had no money and I had no family money. So I actually had to work as an overnight shift during Columbia Journalism School. And I had these really precious language skills, so Chinese and Hindi and Urdu. So I actually spoke a few languages, and I was able to get a translator job on a documentary series about emerging powers, looking at both India and China. And so I was hired as a really young translator, and I would do the overnight shift on a documentary because I was a writer. So I had no knowledge of documentary. I grew up without a TV. So in the edit room, translating this documentary series was where my mind was completely expanded and frankly, like blown. I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And what would happen is I'd be translating, and in the morning, I would still be there. And the producers would come in. They're like, don't you have to go to school? What are you doing here? I'm like, I love it. This is amazing. And they're like,
You're like, this is my school. This is school. Yes.
So it turned out I was like a terrible translator. So the producers just basically said, why don't you be a production assistant? They're like, you're really like not a great, very specific translator. It's not your, calling. So they hired me as a PA the moment that I graduated from Columbia. And that was actually the beginning of my documentary career.
I think today, especially when young people, there's so much pressure to do things exactly right.
Yes.
In teen years and in college, and you've got to do this, 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 and this, and you've got to have this many activities, and you've got to have, a
It's
resume
so true.
by the time you're 18, or, and hearing from leaders like you who really forged an unconventional path toward
Right.
success, and what those unplanned experiences lead you to, I think is so important. And I do think that it does show up in the way you lead Frontline, because you are open to unconventional approaches.
It's
You
true.
are open to different voices, and you're experimental in your approach. And those are all things that add up to exciting leadership. And because, as you've mentioned several times, just the facts, the basic tenets of good and strong journalism are always at your core. So
Right.
it gives you room to experiment because the journalistic
Right.
integrity is there at the center.
Right. It has to be, right? So if you had to pick my religion, it would be journalism, right? And so, but at the core of what that means, it means making sure, and something I say almost daily is reporting against our assumptions. So you assume something, and I was a debater in high school. So the one thing that this rural town high school had was a debate program, and I was a debater, and I was a fierce, passionate debater. And I learned as a young person how you could turn the rock over, how you could argue different ways, and how you could twist facts even, and how dangerous that was. And so I learned at a very young age how different perspectives were important to also be factual. So let me be clear about what I mean. When I say different perspectives, it does not mean you give a platform to a racist or a white supremacist. It means that you lean in and you ask tough questions, that you always come at it from an ethical, journalistic, I would say, stance, right? No 50-50 there. But that you do ask those tough questions from a perspective that is anti-racist is key. And that you also do then, when you bring everything back and we're vetting it, that you ask yourself tough questions in what you have collected, so that you make sure that you're seeing your own biases, but you're also seeing where you might not have quite gotten it right, right? We had a moment recently where we were reporting on January 6th, and we had a person who was a protester, or an insurrectionist rather, and we didn't have the goods on him. So we held it back. We're like, okay, well, we don't need to publish that, but we're going to continue to report that particular story. You'll see in the upcoming film, but we did not publish that in our first piece of work on the insurrection. So this is the other thing, is making decisions as to when to publish. And I always say something very important at Frontline. Until you publish, argue and make sure you have it right. But if you get it wrong when you publish, that's the problem, right? It's the process that precedes publishing that is the thing that I cherish and I hold the line on.
And that you're rigorous, right?
Yeah, absolutely rigorous. And there's a big team of people who work with me on that.
Yes. And we can't wrap up without talking a little bit about what it's like to be a leader at the level you are in your particular shoes. And the things aren't always easy. I do know, because I know you, that sometimes you show up at a meeting and people are not expecting the executive producer to be you when you walk in the room. And just talk a little bit about how you manage that.
I was so surprised at the very beginning that my name, I didn't ever think of it, but my name is not gender specific. So I would show up. It happened to me just last week again. Unfortunately, it did, where I showed up and people assume I'm like the secretary or the helper to the person who's coming, who must be the person who runs Frontline. It happens to me, all the time. And I think my name is not gender specific. It also tells me something about Frontline's identity that we need to shift and work on. The assumption is that it's male led. And so our work, right? And you can't fix everything, but certainly increasing female voices, people of color voices, the stories that we tell will slowly evolve us to not having that be the assumption. And of course, we're moving forward as women as well in leadership positions. I usually take a breath and I think, they're going to realize in about like a nanosecond that they've made a mistake and it's their problem. But I just stay still for a minute and say, actually, I'm the executive producer of Frontline. I lead the show. And usually they're like, you really do? Like, actually, like you do that? So you make those decisions? And I'm like, right, no, I do. I'm the executive producer. It's great to meet you. And just move forward, And it happens so often that I just do it now, just straightforward. It used to take me off my game and now it no longer does, which is good.
That is good. Yes. It's good because you own your space. And I've seen you you serve on many boards. And as I mentioned, you're a judge for the Livingston Award. So you are in spaces where you are bringing your leadership, your journalism leadership with you into rooms that people like both of us haven't always been in those rooms. And so it's always a pleasure to walk in with you. If you look at the future of Frontline, you've done so much in moving Frontline forward already, but what do you look at as your next challenge or the place you want to go next?
I mean, first of all, I would say walking into a room with you is always an honor. So that has this professional friendship has been so important to me as well. I have a number of women who are in leadership positions now, and it's remarkable to see us all in these positions and how the conversations we have are very, very important to me in my sustainability, frankly, right? My own personal and professional sustainability and success. So I just had to say that.
Thank you. I feel the same.
So the future of Frontline, I think the most important thing for Frontline is actually to sustain public media, So public media as an idea, the idea of public media, the stations all across our land, right? To make sure that there is still a station system that supports serious journalism, serious programming, children's programming that is non-commercial. If you had to ask me what I care the most about is creating an environment that has sustainability at its core for the work that we do, that is not just media, but has education wrapped around us. You know, inherent to Frontline is that Frontline's work is in 66% of the public schools. I care about the reach of Frontline into the schools as much as I do my audience figures on YouTube. I want public media journalism to be ethical, to be forward-facing, to really get in the DEI game seriously, and to make change in an ethical way so that we have a bright future. And I think all of those things need to be of a piece for that to happen. And that's our biggest asset and our biggest challenge. So that's what I'm focused on right now, is how we can all move forward together.
Well, that is a tremendous note to bring this conversation to a close on. The future of public media. For those of you watching who are regular Frontline viewers, you know that you can see Frontline on Tuesday nights on your local public media station. And you can also find Frontline streaming on numerous platforms. We hope that you will continue to watch. And Rainey, we are so proud of your leadership, and I look forward to every new film. The new film that we saw a bit of in this conversation, American Insurrection, premieres on April 13th, and we look forward to more great work from you. Thank you
so much, Lynette, for everything throughout all of our work together. Thank you.